Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Hey. We are doing today page Samach Ches Amid Aleph. So we're holding in Hilchos Pesach Siman Tov Samach Vav, and we are continuing Siv Dalet. So before we go further, I just have to remind everybody what we have been speaking about the last couple of days here in Siv Dalet. We've been discussing a case where water fell onto the flour that you want to use for Pesach. And of course, in the context of Pesach, flour and water don't mix. As soon as the flour gets wet, the chimutz process begins, and we have 18 minutes to deal with it. After that, it's going to become chametz. So if we have flour that was exposed to water, we have a problem. Or we have a case of a sack of flour, and we see that the sack became wet. Let's say we accidentally put the sack down in a wet area, and now we see that the sack is damp. And that leads us to believe that that dampness penetrated the sack and it went into the flour. So now we have an area of flour inside this sack that has become wet. So the Mechaber gave us two different ways that we could salvage the rest of the flour. One way he said was we could take the sack, and yesterday I was using my trusty little sack over here. We could take the sack, we could grasp in our hand the fabric of the sack together with the flour that's in that area. And by doing so, we can isolate the flour that became wet from the rest of the flour, toss out the dry flour, use that dry flour for Pesach use, and discard the wet flour. Then the Mechaber said, if we can't use that eitzah, if that's not practicable, and for example, the Mishnah Berurah said, if we're dealing with a case where we see that the sack has gotten wet in a few different areas, so it's just not practicable for us to be able to grasp all these different areas, we only have two hands, and empty out the sack. So he said, if that's not practicable, there is another eitzah. There's another thing that we can do, and that is we can sift all of the flour. And with the thought process being that when flour gets wet, it forms clumps. Regularly, flour is extremely fine, but once it gets exposed to moisture, the areas that were exposed to moisture become clumps. And now, by sifting it, you will sift out those clumps. The Mechaber didn't like that idea initially. He says that idea is not as good an idea as using the method of isolating it, because we see in the Rishonim, some of the Rishonim say that that's a big kula to think that you're going to be able to sift everything out, because some of those clumps might not be so big and they might work their way through the sieve. So this method of sifting out the flour that got exposed to moisture is only a secondary eitzah. We would prefer to use the other eitzah to isolate the flour that became wet. Then the Mechaber said on the bottom of Samach Zayin Amud Beis, I'm going to read to you the last line. I'll start the Mechaber from there. The Mechaber said, "Avalim nisyave shalach luches loy mahani rikud." This whole eitzah, the whole idea of employing this method of sifting out the flour that became wet, that's only efficacious before the flour dried. If the flour was wet and then it dried, and now you want to try and sift out the parts of the flour that have become exposed to moisture, the Mechaber said that will not work. Why? The mifrach, because those clumps will break up. Now that they're dry again, they will break up into small crumbs. Umisarevim hashar, and it will get mixed in with the rest of the flour. And the Mechaber said, therefore, we're now in Samach Ches Amud Aleph, va'aser la'achloi b'Pesach, and it would be forbidden, it would be prohibited to eat this flour on Pesach. Ela, rather, what you'll have to do is yiragdenu, you'll sift out whatever you could sift out, because if there is chametz in there, you got to do bir chametz. The rest, v'yishmerenu ad achara Pesach. The rest of it, I just see that my connection broke down there for a second. Okay, it seems to be back on. So the rest of it, you could put away for use after Pesach. So again, I don't know what we missed over there when the connection went down momentarily. You'll sift out whatever you can sift out, and that you'll do bir chametz on, and the rest of it you'll put away for use after Pesach. Now, we already did Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tez Zayin that starts on the bottom of Samach Zayin Amud Beis. I'm not going to read through that Mishnah Berurah again, but I'm just going to tell you outside what's necessary for a proper understanding of the Mishnah Berurah that we're going to do today. The Mishnah Berurah said that problem, once the wet areas of the flour dries up, the reason that it's problematic and you can't do rikud, you can't sift it out, is because, like I said, those areas that have become wet, the clumps will dry up, and now they'll break apart. And even if you try to sift it, some of those tiny little crumbs will work their way through the sieve. You will not be able to properly sift out everything. Then the Chavetz Chaim said, now, even though you would think if you did this before Pesach, it shouldn't be a problem. Because if you did it before Pesach, so it got wet before Pesach, okay, now you have this problem on Pesach. It's a taruvus of lach balach. We usually view flour as being a mixture of wet ingredients because, like we said, flour is very fine and it blends completely like liquids do. So therefore, we look at it as a taruvus of lach balach. And the rule is that by taruvus of lach balach, we do not say chayzer v'neir. We do not say that a prohibited substance that had become bottle reawakens when it becomes asur. So, like this, we have a taruvus that happened before Pesach. Before Pesach, whatever chametz is in this sack of flour was batel b'shishim. Before Pesach, before the zman iser of chametz, chametz is batel b'shishim. So if this happened a week before Pesach, whatever chametz might be, there was batel. Now, what are you afraid of? You're afraid of on Pesach it's going to be chayzer v'neir, and now even though it was batel previously, now the iser is going to be reawakened. We don't say that by lach balach. And lechera, this is a taruvus of lach balach. Said the Mishnah Berurah, no, this is not considered lach balach. Why isn't it considered lach balach? Because once you have flour that was exposed to moisture and it formed clumps, even though they dried up and they broke into crumbs, those crumbs are still not as fine as the rest of the flour. It will not blend well with the rest of the flour. Therefore, it's not a taruvus of lach balach, and therefore we would say chayzer v'neir, and therefore this taruvus is going to be also on Pesach. That's what the Mishnah Berurah said in Eis Katan Tezayin. Now we go on Samach Ches Amud Aleph, several lines down into the Mishnah Berurah. We go to Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Yud Zayin. So in Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Yud Zayin, the Mechaber had said va'asur la'achloi. This taruvus is going to be forbidden for consumption on Pesach. So you had this sack of flour, it got wet. Now you went ahead, after it got wet, it dried up. Now there's nothing you can do. You can't do rikud. You still could theoretically isolate it. Maybe that you can do. That the Mishnah Berurah said yesterday that eitzah would still work. If you could isolate the area that got wet, that eitzah you could still use. But the eitzah of rikud, the eitzah of trying to sift out the parts that got wet, that you cannot do. And the Mechaber said, v'asur la'achloi, it's prohibited for consumption on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, va'afilu im afu kaidem ha'pesach. Even if you took this flour and you actually baked it into matzah before Pesach, it's still going to be asur. Sha'av sha'perur nefa, because even though normally we say once something got baked, it could no longer become chametz. So the Chavetz Chaim is pointing out, why am I telling you that this is asur even if you bake it before Pesach? Now it's Pesach, but it's already baked. What's the problem? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, harehu chametz. What do you mean? This got wet 2 weeks before Pesach. It sat for 18 minutes without being worked. So it became chametz. Now you baked it after it was chametz. So what does it help? That it's already baked. V'loin is batel, and the chametz was not batel, even though it was batel before Pesach, because before Pesach it was batel b'shishim, but now on Pesach it's chayzer v'neir. Now on Pesach the iser is reawakened, because like we said, we don't consider this to be a taruvus lach balach. So since it's not lach balach, we say chayzer v'neir. So you have chametz in this baked piece of matzah that's not batel. The canal, like we saw previously in Seif Katan Tezayin. That is the Chavetz Chaim's understanding of the Mechaber. The Mechaber is saying this taruvus, you have, again, I just want to fix in everybody's mind the case. You have flour that became partially wet before Pesach, or a sack of flour that became partially wet before Pesach. You went ahead, after it got wet, it dried up, and now you went ahead and you used this mixture of flour, you baked it 2 weeks before Pesach into matzah. Now you have it on Pesach. This matzah is aser because it has clumps of chametz in there that are not bottled because they're chayzer ne'er. V'ayin b'pri chadash. However, he says, take a look in the pri chadash. Shedaitoi demikri lach balach ve'ina chayzer ne'er. The pri chadash takes issue with the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. The pri chadash says this is considered a taruvus of lach balach, even though we have clumps of flour here that are now coarser than the rest of the flour. And because it's coarser than the rest of the flour, it does not blend completely with the rest of the flour. Still in all, the Pri Chadash says, this flour is considered a taruvus of lach balach, and the problematic clumps that are in the flour that were bottled b'shishim before Pesach, we do not say chayzer v'neir on Pesach. So according to the Pri Chadash, this flour is really mutter on Pesach, because since the whole problem happened before Pesach, it got wet before Pesach, so it was bottled b'shishim before Pesach, and since it's lach balach, it's not chayzer v'neir on Pesach. That's the opinion of the Pri Chadash. V'al kol panim, and the Pri Chadash says, certainly, mutter lefos. It's definitely mutter to take this flour before Pesach, knead it into a dough, bake it, and then eat it on Pesach. The Pri Chadash says, I differ with the Shulchan Aruch. I hold that this is b'chalal not a problem. I hold that this flour is completely mutter on Pesach, because whatever problematic clumps of moistened flour there are inside this taruvus, it was bottled b'shishim before Pesach, and on Pesach it's not going to be chayzer v'neir, because a taruvus of kemach in kemach, a taruvus of flour in flour constitutes a taruvus of lach balach, and we don't say chayzer v'neir. So according to the Pri Chadash says, I differ with the Shulchan Aruch. I hold that this flour is completely not problematic. But certainly, says the Pri Chadash, if you bake it before Pesach, then it's certainly not a problem. And then it's certainly mutter to eat on Pesach. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah. I'll tell you why. First, he says, "V'cheini skimu harbe achronim." He says, and many achronim agree with this Pri Chadash, and he brings down here a list: the Shari Tshuva, in the name of the Pnei Yeshua, the Ginas Vradim, the Sefer Magen Elef, the Sefer Emek Halacha. They all say that if you have this problem that cropped up before Pesach, bake it before Pesach. Why? The achar shenefa, because certainly once you knead this flour into a dough and bake it, naaseh gush echad, now it becomes one item. V'nizbatel ve'eino chayzer v'neir. Now, when you take a baked matzah, take a matzah and look at a matzah. Is it a taruvus? Is it a taruvus of flour and water? Is it a mixture? Are you going to look at a baked matzah and say it's a mixture of kemach bekemach? No, it's not a taruvus, it's a matzah. It's one piece, it's one matzah. We don't look at it as being a mixture of ingredients, it's one matzah. So the Pri Chadash says, certainly, you're worried about chayzer and neir? Certainly, if you take this flour and you knead it into a dough and you bake it, now on Pesach, it's naaseh gush echad, it's turned into one matzah, and we don't say chayzer v'neir, that there's a clump of problematic flour inside this matzah that now its prohibition is reawakened, because even though it was bottled before Pesach, now it's on Pesach, now it became aser, and now it's chayzer v'neir, and it's no longer bottled. We're not going to say that on a gush echad. V'ayin b'magen elef, and the Mishnah Berurah says, take a look at the Sefer Magen Elef, shakasav oid snif lazeh. He adds on another very interesting svara, why we should be able to be makel, to rule leniently over here. What does he say? I'll tell you an interesting eitzah, he says. Sheyikach tzas min hakemach, if you have a sack of flour that got wet 2 weeks before Pesach, and then it dried up, so you go to the Rav, and you ask the Rav, what do I do? I had this sack of flour. I saw on Sunday that it got a little damp. I was going to take care of it on Sunday. I forgot. Now it's Tuesday, and it already dried up, and it was in a bunch of places that it was wet, so I can't do the method of isolating the wet areas with my hands. So the only eitzah that I could do is sifting it. But I know, so the Rav says, well, the Mechaber says that sifting it doesn't work once it dries up, because once it dries up, even the parts that were wet, it'll crumble into small crumbs, and sifting doesn't work. Oh, so Magen Elef says, I'll give you an interesting answer. It's 2 weeks before Pesach. Scoop out some of the flour and knead it and make yourself a nice donut. How does that help? Says the Mishnah Berurah, quoting the Magen Elef, "V'nisla hachametz b'masha achal." If you know that you ate from this sack of flour before Pesach, so now there's another reason to be lenient on Pesach. Oh, there was a certain amount of chametz in the sack? It probably came out when I made the donut. I made a batch of donuts 2 weeks before Pesach. When I scooped out flour for the donuts, I probably got whatever was chametz when I scooped out for the donuts. Certainly, we wouldn't rely on this as a reason to be makel on its own. But this is a classic case of an halacha where we are mitzaref. We combine different svaras in order to come to a ruling. Sometimes when there's a need for a kula, there's a shasat chak, the pressing circumstances, or it's a question of significant financial loss. So we're looking for a kula. We have a reason to look for a kula. So if we have different svaras that different poskim say, we can combine them for a kula. So over here, we have another reason to be makel. We have this Magen Elef. The Magen Elef says, make a batch of donuts before Pesach. So now we could say that the chametz went into the batch of donuts. And also we could say, like the Pri Chadash, that it's lach balach and the Isser is not chayz v'neir. And also we could say, like the Pri Chadash, that certainly if we baked it before Yom Tov and it's nasa gush echad, then certainly we don't say chayz v'neir. So now we have 3 reasons to be makel. If we have 3 svaras to combine for a kula, then we can rule leniently and we can be makel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, so the Mishnah Berurah continues, V'yesh lismach al zeh b'makom hefsid. So we could rely on all of this in an area of, in a question of significant financial loss. We could rely on all of these various reasons to generate a kula. Umikal makom, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, an interesting thing. Umikal makom, nevertheless, yikach matzos acheros leleilos rishonos. We should not use these matzahs by the Seder nights in order to be mekayim the mitzvah of achilas matzah. You know why? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Dal kol panim ein zeh shomer kahegin. Because when we want to be yotzei the mitzvah of achilas matzah, we need shmura matzah. And we explained earlier, what is shmura matzah? Shmura matzah is a matzah that had shimur, that was guarded and protected against becoming chametz l'shem mitzvah. Now, certainly, if you have a sack of flour over here that you set aside for Pesach use, and you managed to let it get wet, there was a lack in your shimur. You weren't mishamer it properly. You didn't guard it properly. And therefore, it's very hard to say that this constitutes shimur matzah. Your shimur was lacking. So it's not proper shmura matzah. Don't use this matzah to be mekayim the mitzvah. And the Chavetz Chaim says this same concept holds true. Whenever we render something permissible because we're combining svaras, we say that there's a svek sveka. It's a case of a double suffix in halacha, where there's 2 different svekas, why 2 different areas of doubt, why something might be usher. So in a double doubt, usually we rule a heter, usually we rule leniently, but don't use it for your shmura matzah. Okay, now we go to Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Yud Ches. The Mechaber said that this flour is forbidden for use on Pesach. Says the Mishnah Berurah brings up an interesting shaila. V'achborim shenoshchu hasakim. Let's say you look at your sack of flour and you could tell that a rodent got to it and chewed it open. So you see, you had the sack of flour in the basement, and you come down and you see some flour on the floor, and you see a little hole over there, and you can tell the mice got to it. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Im nikar she'achlu min hakemach. If you could tell that rodents ate from the flour, v'nisyave shalach luchas, but there's nothing moist over there. Now the assumption is that if rodents ate from the flour, they got the flour moist, because a rodent has saliva in its mouth. So when he went into the flour and chewed into the flour, he moistened it. Now you see that it's dry. So what do we have over here? Over here we have a case, just like the case we were just speaking about. We have flour that got wet and then got dry. So now you can't use the eitz of rikud. Now you can't use the method of sifting out the moistened parts of the flour because it already dried. Yesh Omrim, the Chavetz Chaim says, there are those that say, it brings us down from the Chayodam, She'emu Toicha Pesach, that if it's on Pesach that you discovered this, Kulay Aser, the whole sack of flour is prohibited. The Talinon Sheholchu B'kama B'kaimais Pasak, because we assume that the mouse got all the flour, because that's what mice do. They get in, they tunnel, they eat, they tunnel, they eat, they tunnel. So we assume that the rodent went all over the sack of flour. And the saliva in the mouth of the rodent causes chimus, just like the saliva of other creatures. So now you can't use method of achizas oisay makom. You can't use the method of using your hand to grasp the area of flour that got wet and isolated, because we assume that the rodent went all over the sack. You also can't of sifting because it already dried up. And we said once the flour dries up, the method of sifting doesn't work. So you discovered this on Pesach, you're out of luck. You can't use this sack of flour. If you discover it before Pesach, so you discovered it before the Zman of Isser Chametz, then you raked akemach, then you could sift the flour and sift out as much as you can the problematic parts. V'yashenu ad achar Pesach, and then you could hold on to the rest of the flour for use after Pesach. You're allowed to keep it in your rishus. You're not going to be over by your roy, by your motzei, because there's only a suffix, there's only a chash chametz. We don't know that there's vaday chametz here. So sift out whatever you could sift out and put the rest of it away for after Pesach. Or yim karenu, or sell it. Ukedin neslach b'mayim, the same as a sack of flour that got wet. Aval harbe achrayim taisim ledina. However, it says the Chavetz Chaim, there are many achrayim. He brings us down from the Taz, the Chagyakim, the Pri Chodesh, the Maimon Mordechai, the Graz. He says there are many achrayim ledina. The gamba zeh mahani lechei saviv makom anoshuchim hakem she'etzlei etiv v'hashayir agdenu. These achrayim say you can use the method of grasping and isolating the flour in the area where you see that the achbar, where the rodent was snacking. And then sift the rest of the flour. And you can eat it on Pesach. Because they say we do not have to assume that the rodent tunneled and went all over the flour. And these achrayim say you could do this even if this occurred on Pesach. 1 second, I'm sorry, but I just need to plug in my laptop over here. This happened yesterday too, and I realized that I use the computer so much, the battery is running down. Hang on, bear with me. Okay, there we go. So we continue in the Mishnah Berurah, right by the Ois Mem Zayin for the Sharat Tzion. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. When we come Makom, nevertheless, he says that really we should try to be machmir like this Yesh Omrim, like those achrayim that say that if this happens on Pesach, we should render this whole sack prohibited. And this whole discussion is only when we discover the sack and the sack hasn't been moved around after the problem happened. So that the flour didn't get all mixed up. If we moved the sack of flour around, or we see that the rodent chewed up a whole bunch of different areas of the sack, so there's no way for us to grasp and isolate the problematic areas, then certainly this method doesn't work. Even according to those achrayim who ruled leniently and said that we could use this method. So the halacha would be like any other case of flour that got wet and that dried up. However, according to what we said in the end of Sif Katan Yud Zayin earlier in the Shir, that even when we're dealing with a sack that got wet with water, we said that we have another eitzah, which is sift the flour as best as you can and then knead it and bake it before Yom Tov, so that it's nase gush echad, so that it's no longer considered a taruvus. And then, according to the Pri Chadash and according to many achronim, it's mutter once you bake it. Pasha to adin gambo that. So to over here, if you found your sack of flour had been attacked by rodents before Pesach, if you go ahead and you sift it to the best of your ability, and then you knead it into a dough and bake it before Pesach, it's nase gush echad. We don't have to worry about chayz of a neir, and it would be mutter on Pesach. V'ayin b'shari tshuva mashakasa be'inyan zeh. Ice cutting your test. The Mechaber said, so this flour that got wet and then dried up, and now you can't use the method of sifting it to sift out the problematic flour, is usher on Pesach. And the Mechaber said, rather, what you should do is you should sift it, take out the parts that are no good, and put it away till after Pesach. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cutting your test, you should sift it. Why are you sifting it? If you're putting away the flour for use after Pesach anyway, why are you sifting it now? Because it's Pesach and you have to do bir chametz. You're worried that there might be chametz in this sack. So you have to sift out to the best of your ability any problematic flour that might be chametz, and you have to do bir chametz on it. You have to dispose of it. Okay. Now let's go back up to the Shulchan Aruch. The last word on Samach Ches Amud Aleph. Continues the Mechaber. Ve'im nisyavesh bepesach. Let's say the flour got wet before Pesach, and it dried up on Pesach. Says the Mechaber, Asar lahashoisai. Now this sack of flour you're not allowed to maintain in your possession on Pesach. You have to get rid of it. Says the Mishnah Berurah on Samach Ches Amud Aleph, Eis Kat Mechaf, V'im nisyavesh bepesach. If it dried up on Pesach, V'atam, the reason over here is that Kaimalon, because we hold chametz and is arev bepesach, that any mixture of chametz on Pesach b'mashu is aser even in a mashu. There's no bittul on chametz on Pesach. V'im nis arev shaloi b'zmanei b'noisid tam, but a taruvus that happens before Pesach is batal b'shishim. Val came therefore im nis yavish b'pesach, if it dried up on Pesach, av shahalich luach haya mikaydem. Let's say the sack got wet 2 days before Pesach, and now it dried up on Pesach. When did the taruvus take place? When did the chametz mix with the rest of the flour? While it was wet, there was no taruvus. There was no mixture. While the area of the sack that got wet is wet, it's a clump or it's a bunch of clumps, and it's not mixing with the rest of the flour. It's only when it dries up and it becomes dry and crumbly again that we say that it becomes a taruvus. So if it dried up on Pesach, when did the taruvus happen? The taruvus happened on Pesach. When a taruvus happens on Pesach, it's not batal. It's also b'mashu. It's not even batal b'shishim. Mikamokan calls manchu meluchloch, as long as it was wet, lo hayim hisarev, it didn't mix. Umasai hischila hisarev. When did the problematic flour mix with the other flour? Kishenis yavesh, when it dried up, v'nifrach pirurim l'sach hakemach, and it becomes crumbly, small crumbs that can mix with the rest of the flour. Imkein nasa taruvas b'pesach. So that means that the taruvas happened, the mixture was created on Pesach. Shehu b'mashu, then it can't possibly be batal. So there's no question over here of bittul, and then do we say chayzer v'neir or not? It was never batal. If it dried up before Pesach, so it was batal before Pesach, and that is the question: do we say chayzer v'neir or do we not say chayzer v'neir? Like we discussed earlier. But if it dried up on Pesach, it's never batal because the taruvus first occurred on Pesach, and on Pesach chametz is also b'mashu. V'asar lahashaisai. And now, since it's chametz that's not batal, you're not allowed to maintain it in your possession. V'afti ragdenu, and even if you sift it, it's not going to help. Even if you try to sift it, that's not going to work because we're afraid that once it dried up, small crumbs are going to fall through the sieve. But this is not the case if it dried up before Pesach. Because then the taruvus happened before Pesach and it's batal b'shishim. And here you have shishim keneged the problematic flour. Right? The whole discussion of this sif, Myri is only talking about a case, when we know that the sack or the flour became wet from water. But let's say we don't know. We don't know. We find that the sack is wet, but we don't know. What did it get wet from? Where was there water down here in the basement? Is it because the hose bib was dripping and some water was on the floor? Or I see that there's an open apple juice bottle over there and I see that some apple juice spilled. So is it wet from apple juice or is it wet from water? Then then you could be makel, you could rule leniently, and if you sift the flour, you could eat it on Pesach, even if the flour dried up and the taruvus occurred on Pesach. Because now we have a double suffix. Maybe the flour only got wet from meiperos, and meiperos ein machmitzin. Apple juice doesn't cause chametz, according to the Mechaber. And if it got wet from water that does cause chametz, maybe the area that got wet and dried up never subsequently mixed in with the rest of the flour. And now I sifted it out. But certainly, if it's easy for you to get other flour for Pesach, you should not rely on this double suffix to eat this flour on Pesach. Rather, you should put away for use after Pesach. The same law would apply if it got wet from any kind of beverage where there's a question between the paiskim whether or not that's a beverage that causes chimutz or not. Also, this flour would be permissible for use on Pesach if you sift it. The Mechaber concluded Sif Dalit by saying that if this flour that had gotten wet dried up on Pesach, also lahashoisa, you're not allowed to maintain it in your possession. However, he does not say that you have to actually throw it out. Because the Mechaber over here is ruling like he's going to in Taf Samach Zayin in Sif Yud, where he learns that if you have a chicken and you shecht the chicken, you have a cooked chicken, and inside the cooked chicken you find a chita, a kernel of wheat that's cracked, it's puffed up and cracked. So you see it became chametz. The Mechaber rules over there that you're allowed to sell that chicken to a non-Jew. Why? Aren't you deriving benefit from chametz? No, you're not. Because guess what? That kernel of cracked wheat does not add to the value of the chicken. The non-Jew is not paying you any more because of that kernel. So too over here, when the Mechaber says that you're not allowed to maintain this flour that got wet and dried up on Pesach, you're not allowed to maintain it in your possession. Yeah, you're not allowed to maintain it in your possession, but you also don't have to do beer on it. Rather, you could sell it to a non-Jew because that extra little drop of flour that got wet and dried up, he's not paying you more for that. You're not making any money on it. So you could sell it to a non-Jew and say, I'm selling it to you minus the value of whatever chametz there might be in there. So we're going to take off a couple of pennies. However, according to the Ramah, later on in Siman Tav Zayin, who argues on the Mechaber and says that we have to burn the whole chicken and we can't sell it to a non-Jew, the same halacha would apply here. The Dan, you should know that according to the agreement of the Achronim, the Mamakim Hefsid Gadol, that in an area of great financial loss, we could rely on the position of the Mechaber in Sif Yud. You could sell the entire sack of flour to a non-Jew. Take out a cup full of flour, sell him the whole sack minus that cup. You tell him you don't have to remove it. You tell him I'm selling you the whole sack of flour minus the value of a cup of flour. However, this is only true if there happens to be a non-Jew right by you when you discover this problem, so you could sell it to him. But if you have to say, I'm going to wait till tonight to sell it to a non-Jew, then you're retaining this problematic sack of flour in your possession until tonight, and we're afraid you might forget yourself and go bake a chocolate cake using it. So therefore, we want you to get it out of your possession immediately, and you're not allowed to hold on to it. So this was a difficult and complicated Seif. I hope everybody was able to follow it. I hope I was clear. Thank you so much for joining me for this Liman HaTorah. The source of Liman HaTorah should stand Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Berurah should send Yeshuas and Refuahs to those that need it, and Parnasa to those who are suffering from Parnasa. We should be mispal. The Berurah should take away all tsar. The Berurah should give us only simcha and only nachas and only Parnasa and only gesund. And we should be zeichet to see Mashiach Tzidkenu and Meher of Yameinu. Be well.